Some moments start out as nothing. Just another day, another conversation, another routine. But then, something happens. Something you never saw coming. Something that changes everything. That night, I had no idea what was about to unfold. It was supposed to be simple. My sister had asked me if her son, my nephew, could stay over for a couple of nights while she handled some personal things out of town. I agreed without hesitation. I had always been close to him, and it wasn't the first time he had spent a weekend at my place. But this time was different. This time, something shifted. It was late, the kind of late where the house should have been quiet, where sleep should have settled in by now. But instead, I found myself tossing and turning, unable to rest. Something felt off. I sat up in bed, rubbing my face. The soft glow of my phone screen told me it was past midnight. The house was silent except a sound, faint, coming from downstairs. My heart gave a small jolt. It wasn't loud, just a subtle shift in the air, like someone moving. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe he had just gotten up to get some water. But something in my gut twisted, uneasy. I slipped out of bed, my bare feet pressing against the cool floor. Moving carefully, I cracked open my bedroom door, peering into the dimly lit hallway. Nothing, but downstairs. A light. I frowned. The kitchen light was on. Slowly, cautiously, I stepped into the hall, my breath shallow. My heartbeat picked up speed as I descended the stairs, each creak beneath my weight sounding too loud in the quiet of the house. When I reached the bottom, I turned the corner. And there he was, my nephew, sitting at the kitchen table, hunched over something, completely unaware of my presence. His back was to me, his shoulders tense, his head tilted downward. The glow from the kitchen light cast a soft shadow over him, making him look older than he was. I hesitated. "You're up late." He flinched, his body jerking slightly before he turned his head toward me. I couldn't sleep. His voice was low, controlled, but there was something else there. Something I couldn't quite place. I studied him for a moment before stepping closer. "Everything okay?" He nodded, but it wasn't convincing. My gaze flickered down to the table. And that's when I saw it. A letter. An old, crumpled letter, folded and refolded so many times that the paper looked worn, fragile. His fingers were gripping it tightly, like it held something important. I frowned. "What's that?" He hesitated. Then, "Nothing. A lie." I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, my pulse quickening. "It doesn't look like nothing." He exhaled sharply, his fingers flexing over the letter before finally setting it down. But he didn't let go completely. I glanced at it again. The handwriting was faded, barely legible from where I sat. But I could make out one thing, the name at the top. A name I recognized. My breath hitched. "Where did you get this?" His jaw tightened. "I found it. In my mom's things." My stomach twisted. "Why do you have it?" His fingers pressed into the paper. "Because I think she lied to me." A cold shiver ran down my spine. "Lied about what?" His eyes met mine, dark, conflicted. And then, "About my father." The word sent a shockwave through me. I stared at him, my pulse pounding. "What are you talking about?" He swallowed hard. "She always told me he left before I was born. That he didn't want anything to do with us. But this," he gestured to the letter, his voice tightening. "This says otherwise." I reached forward slowly, hesitating before picking up the letter. The paper felt rough beneath my fingertips, old, delicate. My eyes scanned the first few lines. And then my breath caught in my throat. He never left. He never abandoned them. He had been looking for them. For years. I looked back at my nephew, my heart hammering. "Does your mother know you have this?" He shook his head. She'd never tell me the truth. Not after all this time. I swallowed, struggling to find the right words. "And what do you want to do?" His expression hardened. "Find him." A sharp silence filled the room. I took a breath, my mind spinning. This wasn't something I had expected. This wasn't something I knew how to handle. But as I looked at him, at the determination in his eyes, I knew one thing. This was only the beginning. And whatever came next, nothing would ever be the same again. The silence between us stretched longer than it should have, thick with something unspoken. My nephew sat across from me, his hands gripping the letter like it was his last lifeline. His words still echoed in my mind. He wants to find him. I let out a slow breath, my fingers pressing against the worn edges of the letter. Do you have any idea where he is? His jaw tightened. No, but I'm going to find out. There was something fierce in his eyes, something determined. And for the first time, I realized just how much this meant to him. This wasn't just about curiosity. This was about identity. And I couldn't ignore that. I ran a hand through my hair, my thoughts racing. What if he doesn't want to be found? His expression darkened. Then I'll deal with that when the time comes. I hesitated. Your mother kept this from you for a reason. That doesn't make it right. His voice was firm, unwavering. I deserve to know the truth. I sighed, glancing down at the letter again. The words blurred slightly, my mind struggling to process them. His father had been searching. He had never abandoned them. But my sister had buried this truth, rewriting history to protect... what? Herself? Her son? Or was it something worse? I looked up at him. You're serious about this? He nodded. I need to do this. Something inside me twisted. I knew I should tell him to leave it alone, to respect whatever my sister's reasons were. But I also knew that if I were in his position, I wouldn't be able to let it go either. I sighed. All right, then we do this the right way. His brows furrowed. What do you mean? I straightened my posture, setting the letter down. If we're going to look for him, we do it carefully. No rash decisions. No surprises. He nodded slowly, but I could see the eagerness in his eyes. So, where do we start? I hesitated, then exhaled. We start with what we have. For the next few hours, we pored over the letter, looking for anything useful. An address, a name, a clue, anything. And then we found something. A city. It wasn't much, but it was a place to start. My nephew's eyes burned with determination. We should go. I blinked. Go where? There. He pointed at the city name. If he was looking for us, maybe someone there knows him. I hesitated. That's a long shot. It's better than nothing. He wasn't wrong. I exhaled, my fingers tapping against the table. If we do this, we do it tomorrow. In daylight. No sneaking off in the middle of the night. He nodded quickly. Deal. Something told me this was a mistake. But it was too late to turn back now. The next morning, we left early. The drive was long, silent for the most part, tension thick between us. I could tell he was running through possibilities in his mind, preparing for whatever we might find. When we finally arrived in the small town, it felt like stepping into another world. The streets were quiet, the buildings old, the kind of place where people recognized each other. I parked outside a small cafe, turning to him. So, what now? His gaze scanned the area before landing on a middle-aged man behind the counter. We asked around. I sighed, but followed him inside. The bell above the door jingled as we stepped in, the smell of coffee and baked goods filling the air. The man behind the counter looked up, offering a polite smile. Morning. What can I get you? My nephew hesitated before stepping forward. Actually, I was hoping you could help me find someone. The man's smile faltered slightly. Depends. Who are you looking for? My nephew pulled out the letter, unfolding it carefully. He pointed to the name signed at the bottom. Him. The man's expression changed. His posture stiffened. The air in the cafe suddenly felt heavier. I exchanged a glance with my nephew before turning back to the man. Do you know him? The man hesitated, then exhaled slowly. Yeah, I know him. My nephew's breath caught. Where is he? The man wiped his hands on his apron, his expression unreadable. Not here. My nephew's face fell slightly. Do you know where he went? The man hesitated. Then, he passed away last year. The words hit like a punch to the gut. I felt my nephew go still beside me. His hands trembled slightly, his breath hitching. I reached for his arm instinctively, grounding him. He swallowed hard. You're sure? The man nodded solemnly. I wish I wasn't. A pause. He talked about you, you know. Said he was looking. Said he hoped one day he'd find you. My nephew's eyes burned with emotion, his throat bobbing as he swallowed. He never stopped looking? The man shook his head. Not once. Silence stretched between us. Then, hesitantly, the man reached under the counter, pulling out a small, worn envelope. He slid it across the counter toward my nephew. He left this, just in case. My nephew stared at it, frozen. Then, with trembling fingers, he picked it up. A letter, addressed to him. His breath shuddered as he turned it over in his hands, his knuckles whitening. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Do you want to read it here? He hesitated, then shook his head. No, at home. I nodded, squeezing his arm gently. Okay. The man behind the counter gave him a small, sad smile. I think he would have been proud of you. My nephew swallowed hard, his eyes glistening. He nodded once, barely able to speak. Then, without another word, we turned and walked out of the cafe, the letter clutched tightly in his hands. The drive home was quiet. My nephew held the letter in his lap the entire way, staring at it, lost in thought. I didn't push him to open it. He would do it when he was ready. When we pulled into the driveway, he finally let out a slow breath. Thank you for coming with me. I offered him a small smile. You deserve the truth. He nodded, then, finally, he tore open the envelope. His eyes scanned the page, his breath hitching. Tears welled in his eyes. And then, for the first time since this started, he smiled. And at that moment, I knew. Even though he never got to meet him, he had finally found what he was looking for. And nothing would ever be the same again.